Good day, Crime Talk aficionados. This is Scott Reisch of Crime Talk, the most fact-driven, unbiased channel on YouTube. Today we have two things on the docket. First, Jeffrey Epstein. He's in trouble, or is he? And two, the Dulos matter. We've got an update. Let's talk about it. Good day, Crime Talk aficionados. This is Scott Reisch of Crime Talk. If you like the channel, please subscribe. If you want to be notified of new content or when we go live, hit that little bell up in the corner so that you can receive those notifications. Today, we have two things on the docket. The first is the Jeffrey Epstein case. For those of you who do not know, Mr. Jeffrey Epstein is a very successful hedge fund manager, and for lack of a better term, is a billionaire. And Mr. Epstein has a bit of a problem. He apparently likes to hang out with young, underaged women. That's a big problem in today's society, or just about any society. Anyway, to make a very long story very quick, Mr. Epstein was in trouble in Miami back in early 2000s, 2002 through 2005, he was accused of basically sexual assaulting young women. He was also expected to be indicted at the same time that he was under federal charges. And at the last minute, the United States Attorney, who is now the Commerce Secretary, cut a deal. And under that deal, Mr. Epstein was allowed to plead guilty to multiple counts of solicitation of prostitution and avoided a 53-count indictment in the state of Florida, as well as federal charges. Given what it appears the authorities knew at the time, it was a pretty good deal. Mr. Epstein served a little over a year in jail, but was permitted to leave up to 6 days a week to go to work. For lack of a better term, that's known as work release. Mr. Epstein had to register as a sex offender, but basically moved on with his life. Well, now, just the other day, when Mr. Epstein was returning from Paris on his private jet, was greeted not with the typical entourage of staff, but FBI agents. As of the filming of this Crime Talk, Mr. Epstein is still in custody. He has another court appearance in a couple of days where he is trying to be released on bond. Obviously, the government is going to try and oppose Mr. Epstein's release, given his resources and ability to leave the country. For someone who is some 66 years old, a lengthy prison sentence where he could face 45 years, essentially a life sentence, he could be considered a flight risk. Mr. Epstein is charged with one count of sex trafficking of a minor and one count of conspiracy to commit sex trafficking of minors. What's interesting is that this indictment alleges the same time period of 2002 through 2005, where it's alleged Mr. Epstein would move people back and forth between New York and the state of Florida to have these young women engage in sexual acts. Most of these acts started out with massages. It's alleged that Mr. Epstein knew the age of these women and knew that they were, in fact, underage. Attorneys for Mr. Epstein have stated this is old news and it has been settled. And this raises several issues that most people have not or will not cover when it comes to this particular story. Mr. Epstein entered into a plea disposition back in 2008. Part of the agreement was what they perceived to be what they referred to as a global disposition, whereby you are going to resolve all of your cases with one plea or involving multiple jurisdictions. And apparently this plea for Mr. Epstein involved pleading guilty to the state charges, federal charges were not going to be prosecuted, and a further indictment was not going to be brought in state court as well. Mr. Epstein relied upon that agreement. Now the question is, can the United States Attorney's Office in the Southern District of New York be bound by the agreement that was cut by the Southern District United States Attorney's Office in Florida. Normally, a U.S. Attorney's Office is not bound by the agreement of another United States Attorney's Office unless they are actually a part of that agreement. There appears to be no agreement of that. Now, the other issue that intrigues me, and I apologize I have not had sufficient time to look at it today simply because of other pressing matters, but that's the issue of the statute of limitations. Normally, the statute of limitations for most federal offenses are 5 years from the date of the last occurrence. The prosecution is charged a conspiracy, and a conspiracy continues until the end of the conspiracy or the last known event of the conspiracy. That's when the statute of limitations begins. But based upon the actual indictment that I have here in my Crime Talk hands, all the allegations are between 2002 and 2005. Doing your math, ladies and gentlemen, that's some 13 years later. As of the time of filming this, it's uncertain how they're getting around the statute of limitations or if I have not found the correct statute of limitations. Perhaps there is an exception to the 5-year statute of limitations. I just haven't found it yet. And I've done these type of cases, but usually the statute of limitations wasn't an issue. But the other issue is going to be the compulsory joinder issue. Compulsory joinder is a legal doctrine whereby if the prosecution knows of charges and they are aware of those charges, they have to bring them all at one time. They cannot piecemeal them. That would be unfair. You can't say, oh, we're going to charge you with this offense, and oh, just when you got done with that offense, we're going to charge you with offense number 2. If they know about it, if the government knows about it and is aware of it, they have to charge them all at one particular time. This case is going to come down on a lot of legal issues. Mr. Epstein has hired one of the biggest law firms in the world, and he is probably going to throw just about every penny of his billions of dollars to make sure that his freedom is not jeopardized. So they're going to have it be a lot of smart people working on this case, and we will see how it turns out. It's going to be interesting to follow. It's going to be interesting to follow for a couple of reasons. If the government can survive the attack by the defense that I would anticipate the defense making, one being that there was an agreement for an immunity as it relates to any federal prosecution of these particular charges. The second issue would be a compulsory joinder issue. If they knew about it and they didn't charge it, they can be barred from that prosecution. And then the third issue would be the statute of limitations. I can assure you, based upon the reading of the indictment, is that they make reference to the victims as well as employees that worked for Mr. Epstein. And there's specific information about calls coordinating these young ladies to come join Mr. Epstein. My hunch, because I have not seen the discovery in the case, is that Mr. Epstein's employees has some sort of proof or corroboration through phone records or something along those lines to show that those meetings, in fact, and calls did take place to corroborate the allegations. This case has also brought out a lot of Mr. Epstein's political connections, and in fact, the Democratic National Committee PR person, who I believe is actually Nancy Pelosi's daughter, said that this could affect lots of people from both parties in the political arena, as Mr. Epstein liked to participate and hobnob with elected officials. There's been reports that now President Trump knew Mr. Epstein, and Mr. Trump today has said that he hasn't seen this individual in some 15 years, and they had some sort of falling out. Of greater concern, I think, will be for former President Clinton, whom was known to have traveled with Mr. Epstein on his private jet, nicknamed the Lolita Express, on several occasions. It's also alleged that Bill Clinton, former President Bill Clinton, also would tell his security detail that they were not needed and he could handle it from here. We'll see how that plays out. And Mr. Epstein, in an ability to save himself, may throw other people under the bus, as we have talked about before. The threat of imminent incarceration tends to break the bonds of loyalty. It'll be curious to see if Mr. Epstein will actually throw people under the bus as to other illegal activity to get a reduced sentence for himself. Now, the next case on the docket is that of Mr. Dulos. Those of you who don't know, Mr. Fotis Dulos is a Connecticut man. He's a home builder who is accused of killing his wife, Jennifer Dulos. They have 5 children, and they were going through what could be reasonably called a bitter or nasty divorce proceeding, particularly revolving around the custody of the children. Jennifer Dulos went missing back in early June, and in early July, a month had passed and nothing had really been discovered as to her whereabouts. Early on, Mr. Fotis Dulos and his girlfriend were arrested because the police believed that the two of them had been traveling around New Canaan or New Canaan. I'm sure I pronounced that miscorrectly one way, dumping items in Mr. Dulos's truck into trash cans as well as down drain spouts. As it turns out, the police have determined that an employee of Mr. Dulos was driving the Ford Raptor pickup truck at issue that was seen dumping these various items around New Canaan, Connecticut. Michelle Triconis, the girlfriend of Fotis Dulos, was also arrested on these same sort of obstruction charges. She's bonded out. There's been reports that she had gone in and proffered with the government, and it's reported that she had no idea about anything related to the truck being in New Canaan, items being thrown in the trash, and frankly, no reports as to the disappearance of Jennifer Dulos. There's also been some reports that both of these individuals had alibis at the time that these alleged events were taking place. Mr. Dulos made headlines when he was bonded out of custody through his attorney, whereby he alleged that perhaps Miss Jennifer Dulos was doing a gone girl and trying to make him look bad, and that she was simply had disappeared. A lot of people criticized Mr. Dulos and his attorney for that, but apparently it's working. Now, individuals from Mr. Dulos's competitive water ski club have come forth saying that he's really a great guy. Apparently, Mr. Dulos and his 5 children competed in water skiing national events and are apparently quite good. And so these individuals know Mr. Dulos and are saying that he's frankly a really nice guy. And Miss Dulos was obviously seen on about May 24th was her last sighting, and no one has seen her since, but they are taking his side. A Crime Talk subscriber has emailed me photographs of Mr. Dulos's residence. And it's not that anybody's out stalking Mr. Dulos, and I take this subscriber at her word regarding the photographs, and the intent wasn't to go out and stalk or do anything weird, but it's simply to show how thick the vegetation is around that area of Connecticut and how difficult it would be to find somebody in those woods, particularly if they were injured or, in fact, deceased. So we thank our Crime Talk subscriber for those photos. Do truly appreciate that. And that's the beautiful thing about the World Wide Web, is that all these people are essentially investigators and can help find evidence as it relates to this case and to make sure the truth comes out. Although Mr. Dulos is in a situation where he is certainly the prime suspect, the husband of a woman that he is divorcing while he's in an extramarital affair and a custody fight. It certainly doesn't look good. But Mr. Dulos, like all people we talk about on this particular channel, or all people that we talk about on Crime Talk, are presumed innocent. That presumption should remain with them until and if they either plead guilty or the prosecution proves their case unanimously to a jury. At this point, there have been no charges as it relates to Mr. Dulos. So, thank you for watching this episode of Crime Talk. We are hopefully going to have a great Crime Talk tomorrow. We have a guest that is coming, but I'm not going to say his name. I'll just say that I think that you all will find it very, very interesting. Thank you for watching this edition of Crime Talk. Please like the channel. Please subscribe. Please leave a comment. Have a great day.